A boot crunched through ice on the sidewalk. A small body knelt down hard in the snow. Two thin arms wrapped around something that wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. Her hand was ice. Her eyes were half open, not seeing anything. The boy pulled off his jacket. It was the only one he had. He pressed it around her shoulders and started rubbing her arms the way he'd seen someone do once, a long time ago. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know her husband had worn a uniform for 30 years. He didn't know brothers in green had been watching out for her quietly for months. He just saw a woman who was dying in the cold. His name was Eli. He was 11 years old. He was homeless. What he did next brought 4,000 soldiers to one street. Stay with me on this one. To understand what happened on that street, you have to back up. Just a few hours. Eli had been on his own for 7 months. His mother had died in the spring. Cancer. Quick. The kind of quick that leaves a kid looking around a hospital room, wondering what to do with the rest of his life. There was no father. There were no grandparents. There was a county worker with a clipboard and a foster home in the next town over. He was there for 3 weeks. He walked out one morning while the foster father was yelling at the foster mother about a phone bill. He never went back. That was 7 months ago. By winter, he had a system. He slept inside an abandoned laundromat on the south end of town. The back door didn't lock anymore. He kept his backpack under a row of dryers that didn't work. He had 2 pairs of socks, 1 jacket, a flashlight with a dying battery, and a paperback book his mother had read to him when he was small. Now here's the thing about that town. It was a military town. Not a base town exactly, but the kind of place where every other house had an American flag in the yard and a sticker on the truck that said which unit somebody had served in. There was a VFW post on Main Street. There was an American Legion Hall behind the grocery store. There were old men in ball caps that said Vietnam Veteran and Desert Storm in Korea who drank coffee at the diner every morning at 6. Eli noticed all of it. He didn't talk to any of them. He had learned that grown-ups asked questions. Questions led to phone calls. Phone calls led to clipboards. He stayed quiet and he stayed moving. That morning was the coldest one of the year. The radio had said -4. Eli had heard it from the speakers at the gas station. He had been inside for 2 minutes pretending to look at chips so he could feel his face thaw. The clerk knew. The clerk always knew. But the clerk didn't say anything. Some adults didn't say anything. Those were the good ones. He left the gas station and headed north. He had a route he walked every day. It took him past a few houses where the porch lights stayed on all the time, and past the back of the bakery where they sometimes left a tray of day-old rolls by the dumpster. It took him past a small white house with a wooden ramp built up to the front door. He always slowed down at that house. He didn't know why. The house belonged to Frank Holloway. Frank Holloway was 68 years old. He had served 31 years in the United States Army. He had 3 bronze stars and a Purple Heart, and a knee that was held together with metal pins. He had a wife named Margaret who had been the prettiest girl in her high school. She had stayed by his side through 3 deployments and a year in a military hospital and the birth of 2 children, both of whom were now grown and living far away. 2 years ago, Margaret had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Frank had not told the children how bad it had gotten. He had not told the brothers at the VFW. He had told nobody. He had taken care of her himself, the way a man takes care of his own. She still knew his face most days. She still smiled when he held her hand. That was enough for him. That morning, Frank had stepped out at 6:30 to drive over to the post office. Margaret had been asleep when he left. Asleep and breathing soft. He had kissed her forehead. He had locked the front door. He had told himself he would be back in 20 minutes. He didn't know about the back door. Margaret had been confused the night before. She had walked to the back door and turned the deadbolt and stood there looking at the snow for a long time before going to bed. Frank had not noticed. Frank was tired. Frank was 68. By the time Eli came walking up the sidewalk on his usual route, Margaret had been outside for 19 minutes. She was wearing a nightgown. White, thin, no shoes. She had walked from the back of the house, around the side and into the front yard. Then her legs had given out about 10 feet from the sidewalk. That was when the boy saw her. The hood of a parked car had broken her fall, but only halfway. Her body was twisted on the snow. One arm under her, the other reaching for nothing. Her chest was barely moving. Eli ran the last 20 feet. His backpack thumped against his back. His breath came out in white, ragged clouds. He had never seen a person dying before. But he had seen his mother in her last week, and there was something in the stillness of this woman's face that he recognized. Not death. Not yet. The doorway to it. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am," his voice cracked. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" "Nothing." He pulled off his jacket. His hands were shaking. He laid it over her chest and shoulders. He took off his hat and pulled it down over her ears. He took off his scarf, which had been a gift from a woman at the shelter last December, and wrapped it around her bare feet. He had nothing else to give. So he gave his body. He lay across her chest, careful, the way you would lay across a wounded bird. He pressed his small frame against hers to share what warmth he had. He started rubbing her arms. He had seen this once. At the bus station last winter, a man had passed out drunk in the doorway, and a security guard had rubbed his arms and his chest until the man had started moving again. Eli had watched the whole thing from across the room. He had remembered. He rubbed her arms now. Hard. He talked to her while he did it. He didn't know what to say, so he just said anything. "You're okay. You're okay, ma'am. Somebody's coming. You're okay." He glanced at the house. The front door was shut. He didn't think anyone was home. He had to call somebody. He had no phone. He looked at the street. Empty. It was 6:50 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, and there was nobody walking and nothing driving. He stood up. He left his jacket on her. He ran. He ran to the house with the porch light. He pounded on the door. A woman in a robe opened it 3 seconds later, already looking annoyed. "There's a lady," he said. "There's a lady freezing in the snow. Call an ambulance. Please. Please." The woman stared at him for half a second. Then she saw his face. Then she saw he had no jacket. Then she ran back inside for her phone. Eli ran back to Margaret. He lay back across her. He kept rubbing. "Now I want you to picture this. An 11-year-old kid. No coat. No hat. No scarf. In the snow. Below zero. Holding a stranger's body together with his own. For 9 minutes. Frank Holloway pulled into his driveway at 6:59. He had a paper bag with stamps in it. He saw the boy first. He saw the white nightgown second. He saw his wife. He didn't make a sound. Frank Holloway, who had taken fire in 3 countries and buried 14 brothers in arms, did not make a sound. He left the truck running with the door open. He crossed the yard in 5 strides. The boy looked up at him. His eyes were huge. "I think she's still breathing," the boy said. Frank knelt down on the other side of his wife. He put his hand on her face. He felt the breath. It was there. It was there. Sirens were coming up the street. Frank looked at the boy. How long? He said. 9 minutes maybe. I don't know. You ran for help. Yes, sir. And you came back. Yes, sir. And you gave her your coat. The boy nodded. Frank Holloway looked at the boy for a long second. Then he looked at his wife. He took off his own coat and laid it on top of the boy. Stay, he said. Stay right there. The ambulance came. 2 paramedics. They worked fast. They got Margaret on a board. They got her warm packs. They got an IV. They got her color back just a little, just enough. The lead paramedic looked at Frank. Sir, your wife is alive because somebody got to her in time. Do you understand? Frank nodded. I'm going to need to ride with her, the paramedic said. You can follow. Frank turned to the boy. Come with me. But the boy had already started backing away. He had picked up his backpack. He was looking at the open ambulance doors with something like fear. Son, Frank said. Son, wait. I gotta go. What's your name? The boy didn't answer. Son, please. My name is Eli. I gotta go. He turned and ran. Frank watched him go. He looked at the woman in the robe, who was standing on her porch with a phone still in her hand. He looked at the paramedics loading his wife. He had to choose. He chose his wife. He climbed in the ambulance. The doors closed. They drove. And here's where most stories end. Margaret was stable by the time they got to the hospital. Warmed slowly. IV fluids. Heart rate climbing back. The doctor said another 4 or 5 minutes outside, and she would have been gone. He said it just like that. Gone. Frank sat by her bed for an hour. He held her hand. He prayed quietly. He thanked God. He thanked the boy. By 8 in the morning, Margaret had opened her eyes once. She had looked at Frank. She had said his name. She had gone back to sleep. Frank stepped outside the hospital room. He leaned against the wall. He took a long breath. The crisis was over. His wife was alive. Across town, Eli was back in the laundromat. He had a half a sandwich left from the day before. He ate it slowly. He had no jacket. He was shaking. But he was alive too. And he had not been caught. Nobody was coming for him. He thought it was over. It wasn't. At 8:15 in the morning, Frank Holloway walked back into his wife's hospital room and found a nurse standing by the bed. Sir, the nurse said, there was a boy. Out front. About an hour ago. A boy. He was at the front desk. He was asking if a woman named Holloway had made it. He didn't have a coat. He left before I could get him anything. Frank stared at her. How did he know our name? Sir, I don't know. He was gone before I came back. Frank walked out of that room. He walked down the hallway. He walked past the nurse's station and down the stairs and out the front entrance and into the cold morning. The boy was not there. He had figured out who they were. He had walked to the hospital in the dead of January with no jacket just to make sure the lady didn't die. And then he had left. Frank stood in the parking lot for a full minute. Then he pulled out his phone. He called the VFW post. He called Bill Cazares, his oldest friend, a Marine who had been with him in 1973 and again in 1991. He told Bill what had happened. He told Bill there was a boy. He told Bill the boy didn't have a coat. Bill said one word. Where? I don't know where. He ran. Frank. Yeah. How old? 10. Maybe 11. There was a long silence on the line. Frank, Bill said. I'm going to make some calls. That was 9 in the morning. By 10, 6 men were driving the streets of that town in pickup trucks, looking for an 11-year-old boy with no jacket. They had eyes on the bus station. They had eyes on the gas station. They had eyes on the diner. They asked the lady at the bakery. They asked the clerk at the convenience store. The clerk at the convenience store remembered. Yeah. He comes in most mornings. Just to get warm. Skinny kid. Quiet kid. Brown hair. You know where he sleeps. The clerk hesitated. I'm not going to call anybody, Bill said. I'm not going to do anything that hurts him. I just need to know if he's safe. The clerk said the boy went south every night. Past the laundromat that closed last fall. Said he might sleep in there. Said the back door wasn't locked. By 11, Bill was at the laundromat. The boy wasn't there. But his backpack was. And a paperback book. And a flashlight. And one pair of dry socks folded neatly on top. Bill didn't take anything. He didn't move anything. He left a note on the floor by the bag. The note said, Son, when you come back, please call this number. It's a friend. You're not in trouble. Then Bill stepped outside. He sat in his truck. And he made one more phone call. He called a man named Ray Mendez. Ray Mendez had been a sergeant major in the United States Army. Ray Mendez had retired in 2014. Ray Mendez ran a private veterans network with about 11,000 men on his contact list across 4 states. Ray Mendez had a Medal of Honor in a frame in his living room. Bill told Ray the story. The whole story. The wife. The cold. The kid. The coat. The note in a closed laundromat. Ray listened. Then Ray said, How far is that town from me? 240 miles. I'll be there tomorrow. How many? Whoever can come. If you're still with me, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. We tell stories like this every week. About brotherhood. About loyalty. About the kind of men who show up. There's a lot more to this one. By 4 in the afternoon, Ray Mendez had sent out a single message to his network. 8 lines. Plain words. The story of the wife. The story of the boy. The address of the small white house with the wooden ramp. By 5, the message had been forwarded into other networks. American Legion posts. VFW chapters. Active duty group chats. Reserve units. A motorcycle club out of Texas that was made up entirely of veterans. A private flight crew of pilots who had served in Iraq. A retired Navy chief who ran a podcast. By 7, the call had reached Korea. Reached Germany. Reached 3 different bases stateside. By 8, the first convoy had left a parking lot in Tennessee. By 9, a flight had been chartered out of Phoenix. 40 seats. All taken in 20 minutes. By 10, the boy had still not come back to the laundromat. Bill sat in the cold inside that laundromat with a thermos of coffee and a sleeping bag, in case the kid showed up and was too scared to talk. The note was still on the floor. At 11:30 at night, Eli came back. He saw the man before the man saw him. He almost ran. But he was tired. He was so tired. Bill saw him in the doorway. I'm not going to move, Bill said softly. I'm not going to call anybody. I'm just sitting here. I brought you a coat. The boy looked at the coat. It was draped over a chair. It looked warm. My name is Bill, the man said. I'm a friend of Frank's. The lady you helped. Her name is Margaret. She woke up tonight. She's going to be okay. She's going to be okay because of you." The boy didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I just didn't want her to die." "I know, son." "Is the man mad?" "Frank." "Frank's not mad. Frank's looking for you." Eli sat down on the floor against the wall. He put his face on his knees. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since the spring. But he sat very still for a long time. And outside in the dark, a long way away, men were already on the road. Eli woke up on a folded blanket in the laundromat at 6 in the morning. The man named Bill was sitting in a plastic chair by the door, exactly where he had been the night before. He had not slept. He was drinking coffee out of a paper cup. "Morning, son." "Morning. Do you want some breakfast?" "I don't have any money." "Son, there is no money in this." "Not today. Not ever. Do you understand me?" Eli didn't understand. But he nodded. Bill brought him outside. The truck was warm. Bill drove him 3 blocks. Then 4. Then he turned onto Main Street. And Main Street was full. I want you to see this the way the boy saw it. Trucks, Hummers, vans, buses, lined up bumper to bumper, 3 lanes of them, parked all the way down the street and around the corner and out of sight. Men in uniform standing in front of them. Men in dress blues. Men in dress greens. Men in old field jackets with patches that meant something. Men in motorcycle leathers with rocker patches. Men in wheelchairs in row after row. Some of them were wearing oxygen tubes. Some of them were holding canes. Some of them were 19 years old and stood at perfect attention. Some of them were 82 years old and stood at perfect attention too. Bill stopped the truck. "Eli," he said, "I need to tell you something before you get out." "Okay. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to talk. You don't have to march. You don't have to salute. You don't have to be brave. You just have to walk out there. That's all." "Why are they here?" Bill looked at him for a long moment. "Son," he said, "they are here for you." Eli got out of the truck. The street went completely silent. 4,000 men. Standing. Watching one boy. Frank Holloway stepped forward from the front of the line. He was wearing his old dress uniform. Every ribbon. Every medal. He had not put it on in 9 years. It still fit. It would always fit. He walked to Eli. He stopped 6 feet away. He saluted him. A boy in jeans. With a borrowed coat that was too big. Shoes that were the wrong size. Hair that hadn't been cut in 5 months. A general behind Frank stepped forward and saluted. Then a row of Marines. Then a row of sailors. Then a row of airmen. Then a row of soldiers. Then the wheelchairs. Then the oxygen tubes. Then the canes. 4,000 salutes. Held steady. The boy didn't know what to do. He stood there with his hands at his sides. Frank dropped his salute. He walked the last 6 feet. He knelt down in front of Eli slowly, on the bad knee with the metal pins. It hurt him. He did it anyway. He took off his own dog tags. The same dog tags he had worn through 3 deployments and a year in a hospital bed. He put them around Eli's neck. "Son," he said, "you saved my wife's life." Eli's lip moved. He couldn't make it stop. "I'm 68 years old," Frank said. "My boys are grown. My house has an empty room. My wife wants to meet you. She's home now. She's making soup. It's pretty bad soup, but she made it for you." Eli's eyes filled. "You don't have to say yes today. You don't have to say yes tomorrow. You don't have to ever say yes. But the offer is the offer. You have a family if you want one. You have a brotherhood if you want one. And if you don't want either, that's okay too, because all of these men, all 4,000 of them, are going to make sure you're never cold again. Do you understand? Eli nodded once. He couldn't speak. Then Ray Mendez stepped forward. The man with the Medal of Honor. He came up beside Frank. He looked at the boy. "Son," he said, in a voice that was not loud but carried all the way down the street. "There are men in this country who put on a uniform because they wanted glory. And there are men who put it on because somebody had to. The second kind is what we honor. The second kind is who we look for. The second kind is rare." He paused. "You did a thing yesterday that didn't get you anything. You weren't going to get a medal. You weren't going to get a thank you. You were just going to walk away. You knew that. And you did it anyway. That is what we do. That is who we are. And every man on this street recognized himself in you the second he heard the story." Ray Mendez looked at the 4,000 men behind him. "This boy is one of ours," he said. "For the rest of his life." The street roared. Not cheers. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something that came up from the chests of 4,000 men at the same time. A sound the boy would remember when he was an old man himself. Then the door of the small white house opened across the street. Margaret Holloway came out. In a wheelchair. With a blanket on her lap. With color back in her cheeks. With her hair brushed and her eyes clear. She saw Eli. She started to cry. She held out her hand. Eli walked to her slow, through the open lane the men made for him. He stopped at her chair. She took his hand in both of hers. Her hands were warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, sweetheart." He bent down and put his head on her shoulder. She held him there. And for the first time in 7 months, somebody held him back. The convoy did not leave for hours. The men ate breakfast in shifts at the diner. They paid in cash. They left tips that would carry the waitress for a month. They lined up at the small white house to shake the boy's hand, one at a time, 4,000 times, and the boy stood in the doorway and shook every single one of them. Some of them just nodded. Some of them said their name. Some of them just said, "Thank you, son." Some of them cried and they were not embarrassed about it. By dark, most of them were on the road home. But 6 of them stayed. Frank had asked. Bill had organized. They were going to stay until paperwork was done. Adoption paperwork. Emergency guardianship paperwork. The boy needed a legal home, and there was a system for that, and the system could be fast when the right people pushed it. The right people pushed it. Within a week, Eli Holloway had a social security number that was correctly filed, a birth certificate copied and notarized, an emergency guardianship signed by a judge who used to be a Marine, and a bedroom on the 2nd floor of a small white house at the end of a quiet street. The bedroom had been a sewing room. Margaret had been keeping it ready, in her quiet, stubborn way, for years. Without telling Frank. She didn't know who it was for. She just knew, in the part of her mind that the disease hadn't taken yet, that someone was coming. She had been right. The brotherhood did not disappear after that day. Cards came every week. From places Eli had never heard of. A retired colonel in Maine sent him a hand-carved wooden box with a flag burned into the lid. A widow of a Vietnam pilot in Florida sent him a Bible that had been her husband's. A motorcycle club in Texas mailed him a leather vest with his name on the back, sized small, with a note that said, "You'll grow into it." Twice a year, somebody from the Brotherhood drove through town and stopped by the house just to check in. Just to say hello. Just to see how he was doing. Frank made coffee. Margaret, on her good days, made cookies. On her bad days, she sat in her chair by the window and smiled at the visitors, and didn't always know who they were. Eli would come downstairs and shake their hands the way Frank had taught him. He never lost the habit of small things. He kept his old backpack under his bed. He kept the paperback book on his nightstand. He kept Frank's dog tags around his neck, even at school. The dog tags became famous in the 7th grade. Other kids asked about them. He never told the whole story. He only ever said they were a gift. He wore his coat. The new one. The one Bill had brought him in the laundromat that night. He never threw it out, even when he outgrew it. It hung in the back of his closet. Some things you keep. Margaret lived 3 more years. She did not lose her good days. The doctors said it should not have happened that way. The disease should have taken her faster. They couldn't explain it. Frank could. He thought she stayed for the boy. He thought she had a job to do, finishing the raising of someone, and that her body had agreed to wait. He may have been right. When she died at home. In her bed, with Frank holding one hand and Eli holding the other. She told them both she loved them. She told Eli that the day he found her in the snow was the best day of her life, because she got to come back from it and meet him. She closed her eyes. She went. Eli was 14. He stood in the snow at her funeral with Frank's hand on his shoulder. The brotherhood came back. Not all 4,000. But many. They lined the cemetery. They stood at attention. They saluted her grave the way they had once saluted him. After the service, Eli walked away from the crowd. He walked alone to a corner of the cemetery where there was no path and no marker yet. He knelt down in the snow. He put his hand on the cold ground. Somewhere in a different cemetery in a different town, his mother was buried. He had not been able to visit her grave in years. He had not had a way. He had not had the money. He had not had anyone to take him. But he had a family now. He had a man who would drive him anywhere. He had a brotherhood that would carry him there if Frank couldn't. He was going to visit his mother soon. He stood up. He brushed the snow off his knees. He walked back to Frank. "Ready, son," Frank said. "Ready." They walked to the truck together. The brotherhood watched them go. Now here's the thing about that day on the sidewalk. The one that started all of this. The boy didn't know who Margaret was. He didn't know about the husband or the uniform or the brotherhood or the 4,000 men who would come the next morning. He didn't know any of it. He just saw a woman in the cold. And he gave her what he had. That's all of it. That's the whole story. Men in uniform across this country, men who served and men who still serve, recognize that act when they see it. Because that's what they did. In jungles, in deserts, in places nobody can find on a map. They gave what they had to people they didn't know. When a homeless boy did the same thing on a sidewalk in January, every single one of them felt it. And every single one of them showed up. Because that's what brothers do.